and welcome back to Shelf Center. This is Bryce. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thanks for liking and subscribing. If this is something you end up enjoying, you never know, it could happen. I wanted to do just kind of a series of like, what are some go-to books if you want X? If you want X out of your books, whatever it is. So this first one's gonna be about if you want fast-paced fantasy. This is what I've kind of narrowed it down, my top 5 kind of go-to, if that's the recommendation that somebody wants. I want to do fast-paced science fiction, slower pace, more lyrical prose, best character work. Let's jump to this list. This is my top 5 fast-paced fantasy. Let's get to it. Number 5, I'm gonna go with, we're talking Dark Elf. These ones just, they're a little, they're thoughtful, but at the same time, just it's action-packed, like one thing after the other. So definitely the Dark Elf trilogy. Then there's also the Crystal Shard, the Legend of Drizzt. So I mean, just anything involving Drizzt is going to be just like high action. We'll scratch that itch just that'll have you reading from one event to the next, and it's just so much fun. Then I'm going to go with the Dresden Files. The Dresden Files is great because it's super fast-paced fantasy in a modern world, but this is a series that gets more and more and more epic as you go along. And so these first ones are definite popcorn, where they're fun books. By book 4, you're kind of like, oh, there's a little bit more to this world. And then by book 5, you're like, oh, there's a lot more to this world. And it just keeps getting bigger from there. But these are just, I gobble them up when they come out. And there's 18 books in the series plus some short story collections, so there's plenty to go off of. But I just know so many people that have gotten their start on fantasy through this series, the Dresden Files, and just go, oh my gosh, this is what this genre has to offer. It's so much to it, but again, fast, and you're just going from one event to the next. And poor Harry Dresden, just gets beat up from one thing to the next. It's great. In the chonkiest book series of the list, but I still consider very fast-paced, we're going to go with The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks. This one is, I kind of, was struggling a little bit. I just started law school, and so, I just needed something to cleanse the palate, I remember, and kind of going through a reading slump, and just, this really just invigorated me and got me going again. So much action, even to its detriment by book 3, I'll be honest, but it's still so much fun that I don't really hold it against it too hard. But this series is such a blast. Again, just gets a lot of, and again, this is what I've heard from a lot of people over the years, is just like, oh my gosh, this got me reading fantasy. Like, this is kind of this modern take on fantasy, where, and not dissimilar to Brandon Sanderson, where you're just going, this is a chunky book, but it doesn't read like that. It reads much shorter. All right, this is gonna seem like a chunky book, but it is actually a lot more involved in this than it looks like. But we're going for a classic here. This is a classic, but this is one of the things that classic authors of science fiction and fantasy bring to the table. And I mentioned science fiction because this is traditionally more of a science fiction author, but it's Roger Zelazny's Book of Amber. Now, it's a chonker, it's huge. This is 10 books though, right? So each book is like 100 pages of this thing. So maybe some are like 120. So they're not that, they're very short. And again, these old school authors like Zelazny, they're able to just pack so much into so little. And so you're getting, like, you're drinking from the fire hose as far as getting some world building, which there's a lot of world here in this land of Amber. You're also getting a little bit of an urban fantasy because you've got a multiverse kind of idea here, and just as fast as you can be. And so these are really good slump busters too. If you are having a bit of a reading slump, just something that just you don't have to think much about, but just that keep the pages turning. And finally, this is one that has been on a lot of lists lately. I keep comparing other books to this, but I think it's just such a good example of a modern fantasy with traditional fantasy elements, but done very modernly, done without overly explaining, and you get the world building along the way without too much info dumps and just throwing everything, which just bogged down the reading. And this you you get what you need when you need it as you're going along. And this is going to be, and I just picked one of the books, I have all of them, Michael J. Sullivan's Rare Revelations. I absolutely don't put up the other. This is just one of my favorite covers, and the author does these from the traditional or from the self-published books. So these ones are just a traditional fantasy, but it's a good fantasy duo. You've got elves and dwarves and all kinds of things, and magic and all these things, but just an absolute, just fast-paced, get you right down to the action, to the relationships between the characters, and right to it. I just absolutely love this series. It's so much fun, and again, even this one, yet another one is they're shorter books, but then they're put into omnibuses, and so there's actually 3 books traditionally published through Orbit. That's typically how people have approached this series, but absolutely blast. And then again, there's so many more that the author's written in the same world that you have plenty to go off of. So anyway, that's my list. What are your go-to, just fast-paced, just get you right into it, books that you recommend? Let me know. What am I missing? I know there's plenty out there. This is kind of what I had in hand here. I have plenty more, and I could probably do like 3 more. My list is huge. I could do like 3 or 4 more lists of this because this is just a fun list to do. So anyway, thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.